We're going to start in 4 minutes. Okay, we're going to start. So this class is the second in a series called Paradigm Shift, and it's the way the Lubavitcher Rebbe looked at the world through positive lenses. So today we're going to talk about realizing your potential. Now, self-exploration is an important endeavor, but it can be difficult because obviously we should unconditionally love ourselves, yet sometimes we do subconsciously love ourselves, but we're not able to realize our potential. So in order to help realize our potential and understand who we are, so that not only are we the best person that we can be, but also best to others, we need to look at the spirituality behind it and what our soul is. So to start off, if we really want to realize our potential, if we really want to become aware of what our abilities are, then we have to look to the Greek aphorism that says, know thyself. What does it mean to know thyself? We have to know who we are deep inside, not who I am externally, but who I am internally as well. Because if I would ask you, who are you? What kind of person are you? You would tell me the foods you prefer, the sports teams we follow, what interests us, what I like to study, who I like to hang out with, what I like to do in my spare time, what's hanging on my wall. These are external things, but many of us view these factors as what defines us. But we're always, most of our lives, we're consumed by what we do, and what we possess, and what we like, and what we're interested in, that we don't take that time to think deeply about ourselves. So this lesson is going to offer us the opportunity to really think about who we are deep inside and how that is a reflection of the way we express ourselves to the world. Interestingly, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the people who corresponded with him, and from the many sichas and the many talks that he gave, it was very evident that he was never satisfied with himself, with what he did. The Rebbe never took any vacations. He was constantly doing and doing. For 70th birthday, instead of taking a vacation or relaxing, the Rebbe wanted 71 new institutions to be opened. So the Rebbe, not only was he hard on himself to constantly be doing and doing and doing, but he was hard on others as well. He wanted people to constantly be engaged in additional activities, to constantly reach out and help others, to constantly do mitzvahs for other people and for ourselves. Now, one Tuesday evening, it was before Lag BaOmer, and there was always little parties or parades or get-togethers on Lag BaOmer. And the rabbi in California, Rabbi Cuny, came to the Rebbe and the Rebbe said, what's going to happen on Lag BaOmer? And he said, I didn't have any plans because it's not a Sunday, it's a weekday and kids have school. And the Rebbe said, what do you mean? There's all these children, and children are excited and interested in holidays and in having a fun time. How can you not have a plan for a Jewish holiday? So as Rabbi said, he quickly arranged a little parade, and he got the kids interested, and he got the kids involved, and he organized this parade, and it was actually the first time the West Coast had a public display of Judaism, and this was in 1970. But he wouldn't have done it. He didn't even think to do a parade on a Wednesday if the Rebbe hadn't encouraged him to do it. So on the one hand, the Rebbe was never complacent. He was never happy with himself, with how much he accomplished, or with how much others accomplished. He was constantly pushing and pushing people. But on the other hand, the Rebbe's love and concern for another person, for his fellow, was there's no comparison to how much the Rebbe cared for others. And so how could it be that the Rebbe was demanding, and yet on the other hand, he had this uncomparable love for another human being? Well, it's like, let's say your spouse prepares a 6-course meal, and the wife sits down, her husband has prepared this elaborate meal for her birthday, and delicious, and afterwards she says, that was a great meal, next time prepare me a 12-course meal. Now, if someone was watching this, they'd think, what an ungrateful wife. So the Rebbe, on the other hand, he demanded more, and yet he still showed this unconditional love. So how do these two reconcile? How can you have one and the other at the same time? So the Rebbe didn't just show this love, but the Rebbe had unconditional respect for every other person, no matter what their level of practice was. So there's a famous rabbi, his name is Zalman Schachter, and he started the renewal movement. He learned in Chabad, that's where he got his rabbinical ordination, and then sometime he decided that this type of religion wasn't for him, and he left Chabad, he left religious Judaism, and he created the renewal movement. It's kind of like a hippie Judaism. And a rabbi, he lived in Philadelphia at the time, it was in the 70s, and the rabbi from Philadelphia came to visit the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, how's Zalman Schachter doing? And he said, I speak to him every once in a while. He seems to be doing pretty well. And, later in the conversation, again, the Rebbe said, if Rabbi Zalman Schachter, how he's doing this, is he earning a living? Is he making money? Is he doing okay financially? And the rabbi said, I don't know. And the Rebbe looked at him and he said, you have a relationship with this person, but you don't know if he's doing okay financially? If you have a relationship with him and you actually care about him, then you should know how he's doing in all aspects of his life. Because the Rebbe didn't just care about a person like, we see someone on the street, or we see someone in public and say, oh, hey, how are you? Just because that's what we do. But the Rebbe actually cared for every single person. Rabbi Sachs would say about the Rebbe, he said that the Rebbe did something extraordinary. He said, the Rebbe said to himself, if the Nazis searched for every Jew out of hate, we will search for every Jew out of love. And Rabbi Sachs says that this was the most radical response to the Holocaust ever received. And he says, I don't know if the Jewish world can still grasp or understand the levels that the Rebbe went to find every Jew with love. So the love, it wasn't just about loving every person. Now, we have a big issue in our society about tolerance. So let's say politics, for example. Yeah, sometimes political enemies will come together. You know, Stalin came together with, Russia came together with America to fight against Hitler. So that exists every once in a while because they had the same objective. But most times, why do politicians not get along? Because there's no tolerance for the other's opinion. Not even talking about politicians. If I'm talking to someone about politics and we have totally different opinions, we might not even be able to get along. Or two people might not even be able to get along because the fact that they have different opinions politically means that they can't tolerate each other. So when we talk about tolerance, it means that we have respect for the other person despite having a difference of opinion. And the Rebbe showed that many times. The Rebbe almost never said anything negative about another person. Even people who had totally different opinions about, who he didn't agree with at all, but he still appreciated and respected that person. Now, obviously, the Rebbe denied legitimacy of anything less than strict adherence to Jewish law. And the Rebbe would constantly say that even though there's assimilation, and even though people are not as connected to Judaism as before, he would still say the only legitimate Judaism is the Torah. He would say, Umakarva la Torah, bring people closer to the Torah, don't change Torah to bring it closer to the people. But when you listen to various people talk about the Rebbe, people who were totally alienated from Judaism, who might not even be Jewish, we notice how the Rebbe had unconditional love. That doesn't matter where that person came from, what their background was, or whether they had totally different of opinion, the Rebbe still had that unconditional love for them. So can you envision a passionate environmental embracing the CEO of a company that dumps toxic waste into the Mississippi River? That was what the Rebbe was. He would have this unconditional love and respect for someone who he had totally difference of opinion to, but he respected that person because of who that person was. And he taught all of us to act this way. So that the point of this class is to show how the Rebbe modeled behavior that we should all try to emulate. There's a famous Supreme Court justice in Israel. His name was Chaim Cohen. And he came from a religious family, but he totally strayed. He was totally alienated from Judaism. And many people viewed him as someone who was a rebel against Judaism because he knew the Torah and he just totally denied everything that he learned. One year he came to visit the Rebbe on Simchas Torah, which is one of the most happiest days of the year. And the Rebbe so much showed his love for him that he gave him a hakafa. He allowed him to dance with the Torah on Simchas Torah. So not only did he greet him and say hello, but this person who had totally distanced and turned his back on Judaism, the Rebbe invited him with open arms and gave him an honor that almost no one got. There's only 7 hakafas. There's only 7 opportunities for the most part to be able to hold the Torah. And one of these hakafas, the Rebbe gave to this person that many people would not accept, or many people had issues with because of his alienation for Judaism. And instead of the Rebbe turning his back on him, the Rebbe embraced him because he appreciated who he was as a person, and the Rebbe saw his soul, and the Rebbe saw his soul. The Rebbe saw who he was deep inside. So in order for us to emulate who the Rebbe was, we need to understand, obviously we can't, the Rebbe was a tzaddik, the Rebbe was on a very high level, but we can emulate certain aspects of the Rebbe's love for every person and delve a little deeper into what the Rebbe saw in every Jew. So there's an interesting law, and it says in the Talmud that if the Sanhedrin, if the Jewish court unanimously agrees that a defendant is guilty in a capital case, he's acquitted. This is the opposite of American law. In American law, nearly every state requires the jury to produce a unanimous verdict for criminal trials and for many civil cases as well. In Jewish law, if there's a unanimous verdict, then the person's not guilty. This doesn't seem to make any sense. If there's a unanimous verdict, shouldn't this mean automatically that the person's guilty? So in order to understand this, we need to back up and look in the Tanya, which is the main book of Hasidic writing. where the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement and the author of the Tanya, writes, every Jew, irrespective of his or her spiritual standing, possesses two souls. One of these souls is the mundane and unholy one, and that's the source of undesirable traits. The second soul of a Jew is a part of God above, literally. So we have two souls within us, two levels of consciousness, so to speak. The first soul is the life force of the physical body and its drive for self-preservation. We call this the animal soul, so to speak, because its concerns are physical concerns, like an animal, for survival and for pleasure. And on the other hand, we have our other soul. We have our godly soul. We have our spiritual soul. And like the Alter Rebbe wrote, mamish, it's literally a part of us. So, like the famous quote is, will the real me please stand up? Which consciousness is the primary definition of our identity? Is it our animal soul, our physical desires that drive us, or is it our spiritual soul, our godly soul? So for most of us human beings, our self-oriented consciousness, our daily activities, our thoughts seem to be more motivated by our animal soul. We're physical beings. We're self-oriented physical beings, and we might have soulful divine experiences, but we're driven by our physicality, by our animal soul, and our divine divinity and our soul, our spiritual soul, is just what we experience. But again, the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, our primary identity is that of the divine soul, which is literally a part of God above. So the Tanya is telling us that our self-oriented consciousness is our divine soul. Not just in the holy people, in tzaddikim and righteous people, but it's in every person's soul. What drives us, what drives every human being is our godly consciousness. So, for example, a working mom, she works full time. So a mom will say, it's true that due to my career, I'm away from my children most of the day. Nevertheless, my real identity, what drives me, the core of myself, is being a mother. And if I saw my child struggling, and for whatever reason they weren't doing well without me at home, I would give up my job to take care of my child. So too, it seems like we're physical human beings. Our physical needs and desires is what drives us. But really, our primary consciousness is our neshama, is our soul. Our soul is not something we had, because if we just had it, it would be something we could lose. Our soul is who we are. We can never leave it. Just like a human being can never become a fish or a spider, our soul is our essence, and we can never leave who we are. The Rebbe once said to someone in Yechidus at a private audience, he said, Freud dug into the human soul and found dirt. Chassidus dug into the human soul and found gold, silver, and diamonds. Because the soul is compared to diamonds that are underneath the dirt. And if you dig deep enough, you could find the soul. And so too, if you dig deep enough, you can find the diamond. So too, yes, we have a lot of physicality. There's the dirt, so to speak, that covers it up. But within each and every human being, there is that diamond, there is that soul that is lying there just waiting to be revealed. It might be covered with dirt, so to speak, but the realization that the dirt is there, what motivates us to uncover each other's soul. So we've established that the presence of the divinity is real. But does it really move us? It's really there, but does it really affect us? Does this core really speak to us and change the way we act? Or is it just a recessive trait, something that's totally irrelevant to our lives, even though it's an important part of our life? So again, we go back to the Tanya, and the Tanya again says, one might mistakenly conclude that our resemblance to the divine soul is just in the recesses of our consciousness. But again, he says the word mamish, meaning it's literally a part of us. It's a tangible part of us. Our soul is an inherent part of every human being that might be subconscious, might be in our subconsciousness, but it can be brought to our consciousness. And our physical life and body, during our physical life, during our day-to-day activities, we can actually reveal this divinity, the divine soul that's within us. And not just that, but we shouldn't see the divine soul and our animal soul as enemies. They're not opposing each other. But on the opposite, they actually work together. So when we say that our divine soul is a conscious and a real part of us, we're not saying that our physical body is not. They're both a part of us. But what drives us is our soul and is our spirituality. And how do we reveal this spirituality? Through the physical. So God created this world. He created a physical world. He created a world where we eat, we drink, we love, we interact with other people. And he specifically wanted this physical world. He wants us to take this physical world and refine it. So when we eat and we make a bracha, we make a blessing on the food, we are elevating the spirituality within that food. When we interact with each other in a positive way, we're bringing spirituality into our relationships. When we give charity, we're taking money, we're taking physical things, and we are uplifting it, and we're bringing spirituality in it by giving charity to another, by taking care of another human being. You put a mezuzah on your door, you're taking a mezuzah that's made out of parchment, which comes from an animal. You're elevating that part of the animal, so that all physical things in this world can be elevated through the spirituality, so that our spirituality actually becomes our not just in our consciousness, it becomes revealed, and it becomes revealed through the physical world. So we take our physical and we take our spiritual and we mesh them together, and we're revealing our spirituality, and we're revealing how the spirituality is hidden within the physical as well. Now, what about if someone does something negative? So we have our godly soul, we have our divine soul. What if someone sins, so to speak, or does their physical takes over their spiritual, so to speak? So again, the Rebbe explains that although the innate goodness in some people is hidden, and there's some people who are more outwardly good people, and there's some people who outwardly their goodness is not as revealed. The Rebbe says, although the innate goodness in some people is hidden, nevertheless, it's the very essence and is the truth of our existence. So every single individual, no matter who they are, there must be a favorable way to view every single person. Even someone who has committed a capital crime, their truest identity is goodness. And therefore, we must be able to find that goodness. And this is why, if a defendant is found unanimously guilty, he's acquitted. Because if the Sanhedrin, if the Jewish court unanimously agrees upon a person's guilt, they have not been able to find an iota of goodness within the person. And because the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, couldn't even find a little bit of goodness, then that means that their entire case is disqualified. Because just because someone commits a crime, and commits a crime that's deserving of a death penalty, so this is not a good person, this is a bad person. But there must be something positive about this person. So let's say everyone says he's guilty, but one person finds that positive and says some reason why he needs to be acquitted, then he's found guilty. Because at least that goodness was found within this person. At least they found a redeeming value. And the fact they found the redeeming value, they found the goodness within this person, now he can be punished. But obviously it's not the judge's fault. But on the other hand, there's a soul. And the Jewish court needs to see the soul and the goodness within that person. There's a famous story about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, and he was known as a lover of the Jewish people. He always found good in everyone. And one time, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev he was walking down, he found a Jew smoking on Shabbos. So he said, there's something wrong. He went to the Jew, he said, Reb Yid, perhaps you forgot it's Shabbos today? And he said, no, Rebbe, I know it's Shabbos. So he said, perhaps you did not realize you're smoking? And he says, what do you mean? How could a person not know that he's smoking? Rebbe, I know I'm smoking. So he said, perhaps you forgot or you never learned that you're not supposed to smoke on Shabbos. And the Jew said, Rebbe, I know you're not supposed to smoke on Shabbos. So at that, Reb Levi Yitzchak turns his head to heaven and he says, God, even when I gave this Jew every opportunity to lie and to somehow mitigate his offense, he refused to do so. Where can you find such scrupulous honesty? So this person basically admitted that he was smoking because he was smoking on Shabbos and he knew he wasn't supposed to. And Reb Levi Yitzchak said, at least this person is honest. He found that iota of goodness. He found that soul within someone who other people would have discredited and said he's a bad person, he's sinning. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak found that goodness within him. And the Rebbe did this all the time. And the Rebbe did not only affirm that we have a neshama, that we have a soul that's the core of our existence, but he said that this soul is not a recessive gene, but it's relevant to our life and we experience it all the time. Sometimes we don't even realize that we experience our soul within us. But our soul is bright and it's shining. And sometimes, someone needs to come along to help us reveal our soul, but it's there. And it's there just waiting to be revealed. There's once the Rebbe Rashav, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, was once talking to his chassid, one of his chassidim. His name was Reb Monya. And they eventually started talking. Reb Monya was a diamond dealer. And in the beginning of the conversation, Reb Monya said, Rebbe, I don't understand. There's all these people that you seem to you talk to all the simple people. Like, why do you talk to them? And the Rebbe said, what do you mean? They're people who have amazing, beautiful, wonderful qualities. And Reb Monya says, I don't see these people having these great qualities. So a little later, their conversation was going on, and Reb Monya was talking to him about the diamonds he sells. And the Rebbe said, let me see some of the diamonds. So Reb Monya took him outside. He put the diamonds out on the table in the sunshine, and he was showing one of these beautiful diamonds. He said, this is a gorgeous diamond. And the Rebbe says, I don't know, it doesn't look so special. I don't see what's so great about this diamond. So Monya smiled. He said, Rebbe, you have to be a maven in diamonds to appreciate its value. The Rebbe said, quite correct, Monya. And on that note, every single Jew is a marvel and is exceptional. And in order to appreciate the value of every Jew, a person has to be a maven. So the Monya might not have appreciated the qualities of a simple Jew, but a Rebbe who's a maven and a Jew who understands the soul, that every single person possesses a soul. And just because one person qualities and their goodness might be more revealed, and the other person might not seem as great, or his qualities might not seem as shining or as apparent, doesn't mean that one soul is less important or not as important as the next. Our souls are equally important, and you have to have a Rebbe to come along and realize the inherent goodness that's within each one of us. So in order to realize the inherent goodness in others, we first have to realize the inherent goodness within ourselves. We all have insecurities, and insecurities drive people either to be creative or to accomplish things to make them worthy. Some people take refuge in putting other people down. Some resort to alcohol or narcotics to avoid confronting the issue of their insecurities. But probably the most common way people look for validation is the most common way that people address their insecurities is by seeking validation. So little children seek validation. Let's say a little kid will climb up on a table and say, see how big I am, I can almost touch the ceiling. So it makes a small child, that makes them feel big. I'm little, but when I stand on the table, I feel like I'm so big. We, even as adults, we do the same thing that little people do. What do? A person is constantly doing acts of desperation to convince others of his or her self-importance. We're doing our version of standing on the table, telling people, hey, look at me. Look how special I am. Why? Because if another person validates how special I am, then I myself will feel that I am special. There's actually a company called celeb4aday.com that for a large fee, you can have the experience of being a celebrity. So they'll come and it will be like personal paparazzi who will chase you down the street. They'll yell questions to you, and people will think that you're a celebrity, and then other people want to take pictures with you. And then all of a sudden you validate yourself because you feel special, you feel important, you feel like a celebrity. And this obviously validates celebrities themselves. What's wrong with this? When we're looking for validation outside of ourselves, we're just further emphasizing our unworthiness, because that validation only lasts a little bit of time. And then after that validation, I need to find another way to seek validation because I feel empty inside. I don't feel like I'm important. When I'm driven by this unconscious feeling of unimportance, we're going to do all these things to try to obtain and try to feel important. And eventually this can become dangerous because it could escalate and constantly looking for validation not only hurts ourselves, but it could hurt our relationships with others as well. So it's easy. We tell our children, we tell other people that we really matter and that we're worthy no matter what. But sometimes we forget to tell that to ourselves. So when every human being, we are important and we have a soul. And how do we know how important we are? So let's look at the question of God. Why does God deserve to exist? Well, obviously, God's existence is from himself. God created himself, so to speak. Each of us has a part of God within us. We each have our neshama. And the most essential I of every person, is our flawless and unconditional soul and part of God that is within us. And if the rejection and the failure that we feel, we wouldn't feel it as strongly if we knew who we really are. Yes, we have faults. Yes, we're not perfect. Yes, we make mistakes. But all our mistakes and our imperfections is not a reflection of who we really are. When we embrace our inherent unworthiness instead of our essence, then we're constantly want to validate ourselves. But when we look at ourselves and we realize how important I am as a person, then we don't need to look to others for validation. A person once wrote to the Rebbe and he said, Rebbe, I'm depressed, I'm discouraged, I'm a failure. What was the Rebbe's answer? The Rebbe said, you're a human being. Of course you have failings in life, but you're a Jew. How can you reduce yourself and say, I'm depressed, I'm discouraged, I'm a failure? Why do you accept this definition of yourself? Why do you accept a definition that's less than a human being? That's just your actions. But you, in essence, are perfection. It's like saying, it's very popular nowadays to tell a child, let's say a child is misbehaving. And instead of screaming at the kid and saying, you're bad, or why'd you do this? You tell the child, your actions aren't good, but you are perfect. Because yes, our actions aren't good, and yes, we mess up, and yes, we make mistakes. But in our essence, who we are, we're perfect. And when we look at ourselves, and we look at ourselves the way the Rebbe looked at us, and the Rebbe looked at every single Jew, and all he saw was a soul. And when you look at a soul, all you see is perfection. So this is a recipe for self-esteem. And like I once heard someone say, before you fall in love with another person, you have to fall in love with yourself. How do you fall in love with yourself? By loving who you are, who your essence is, what your essence is. And then your mistakes and your failures and your mess ups in life, those are just things that you did and things that you can fix up. But in essence, we're perfect. And in order to connect to another person or to reach out to other people, we first have to reach out to yourself. You cannot reach deeper within another than you reach within yourself. So we have to love ourselves for who we are. And on the other hand, loving, like we said, you can't seek validation because that doesn't in the end make you feel happy. But you can't love yourself for your achievements or for your assets or for your place in the world, because then your relationship with other people will also be dependent on these things. And then when those things have failures, when you lose your money or when you don't have friends, or I don't know, your friends leave and you have certain fallings in life, all of a sudden everything that held up your self-esteem is not going to be there anymore. So to achieve that deep and lasting love with another person, you have to experience that depth within yourself. And that love from yourself cannot be dependent on the validation of others, and it can't be dependent on what we have, on our physical traits or on even our physical qualities or on the things that we have in life. Our inner core, we have to remember that our inner core, who we are, doesn't change with time or events. Our true essence is who we are. And that essence is shared by another person. So if I recognize who I am, who I truly am, then I automatically will appreciate and recognize who the other person really is. So when we look into the mirror and we see a physical creature staring back at us, then we just see our physicality, and then we have doubts about ourselves. And then when we look at another person, we just see their physicality. But when we look into the mirror and we're able to see into our essence, into our soul, into who we are, then we're able to look into another person and appreciate and love who that person is as well. So when it says Ahavat Yisrael, when it says love another person, it's not saying love that person because of all their qualities, because of who they are. It's saying love that person irrespective of their character traits, of their political affiliation, of their religious commitment. The human condition precludes our ability to love someone in this kind of indiscriminate fashion. Humans are not built like that. But our spirituality and spiritual humans are built like that. And if we look at ourselves from the spiritual aspect, we're able to love each other on that same level. So instead of defining others by our faults or bad habits, when we define ourselves by who we are, not by our faults and bad habits, we'll be able to define other people by who they are and who their essence is. So the Rebbe there were 10 campaigns, the 10 mitzvah campaigns, and one of them was to love a fellow Jew. And it was not only about his initiative about how to relate to others, but how we regard ourselves, because how we regard ourselves is a direct reflection of how we regard others. Rabbi Telushkin would say about the Rebbe, if you say the Rebbe was very committed to the love of every Jew, that doesn't sound very new. There's been Ahavas Yisrael. It's been written in the Torah for thousands of years. But what the Rebbe did is new, because Jews as a people were committed to this only in theory, but not as a fact. So yes, it says in the Torah, but throughout history, we see that the first and second temple, where the second temple was destroyed because Jews didn't love each other. Jews didn't appreciate each other. Jews didn't respect each other. Love of every Jew, he says, ended up meaning the love of Jews who think like me, because that's human condition. The Rebbe was willing to go beyond that. The Rebbe was willing to say, I love everyone despite who they are, in spite of who they are, because I love me despite and in spite of who I am. And we often find this approach of parents who talk about children, God forbid, who committed a terrible crime. And parents will say, they'll characterize this crime as being so unlike my child. And when strangers reduce their child to the crime that they committed, the parent will try to redefine their child by their goodness. On November 19, 2013, Virginia Senator Robert Deeds was critically wounded when he was stabbed multiple times by his son, Gus, who was suffering from bipolar disorder. And the father was very ill for a while, and he ended up recuperating. But the son, who had stabbed his father, ended up committing suicide. And in an interview with 60 Minutes, 4 weeks after the attack, Robert Deeds said, I really don't want Gus to be defined by his illness. I don't want Gus to be defined by what happened or what he did to me. Gus was a great kid. He was a perfect son. I want people to remember the brilliant, friendly, loving kid that Gus was. So as a father, he was able to look at his child, despite what his child actually did, tried to kill him. He was able to look at his child and see his essence. And when the Rebbe looked at every single human being, he looked at them like a person looks at a child, even a child who committed a crime. So even though the Rebbe knew the people, we mess up, we make mistakes, sometimes they're big mistakes, the Rebbe just saw them as a child, and he was able to look at them as their souls, their neshama. So obviously we're not on that level, and we're not always able to look at everyone perfectly. But when we can look around the world and we can see people, specifically, sometimes it's easier to look at a stranger and appreciate that stranger, despite what they look or act like on the outside, we know that they have goodness within them. But often it's hard to look at people who are closest to us and not automatically get annoyed by their failures or get annoyed by things that we view as them, things that they're doing wrong. And sometimes they might be legitimately things that they're messing up. But we have to emulate what the Rebbe did and look at these people and love them despite what they are or who. Turn that off. We have to look at another person. We have to appreciate who they are and love them despite what they did or what negative actions they might have been involved in. Obviously, this means that we should try to bring people close, and we should try to have a good impression on them and try to help them change whatever issues are going on in their life. But we have to love them despite that. So there's an interesting story in the Talmud that is going to kind of really bring out this point. There was a famous woman, the Talmud in Sukkah speaks about Miriam, the daughter of Bilgah. Miriam, the daughter of Bilgah, married a Syrian Greek military officer. Okay, so it's not just that she married a non-Jew, and not just that she converted to marry a non-Jew. She married someone, and this was in the time of Hanukkah, she married someone who was part of a group, or was part of a nation that was trying to kill and destroy the Jewish people. So this would be example, a Jewish woman converting and marrying a Nazi soldier who was part of Hitler's army. That's exactly what this was like. So Miriam married this military officer. At some point, the Syrian Greeks invaded the sanctuary. They invaded the Beis Hamikdash, the temple. She joined them. She kicked the altar. She kicked the Mizbeach with her sandal, and she cried out, "Wolf, wolf, how long will you consume Israel's money but not come to their assistance in their sign of distress?" So this woman, who totally turned her back on Judaism, who married the arch enemy of the Jewish people, she went into the temple, she desecrated the altar by stomping on it and taunting God, calling God wolf, wolf. Now, the Talmud tells us this story to condemn her disrespect towards the Mizbeach, towards the altar. Look at this woman. She's kicking the altar. She's calling God a wolf. So they're saying, it seems like they're saying something negative about this woman, Miriam Bas Bilga. The Rebbe looks at this like he always does. He looks at this whole story in a totally different light. He says, isn't this kind of strange? This woman converted. She married the archenemy of her people, turned her back on her family and the Jewish people as a whole, and had a comfortable life while her family was suffering. So the Talmud doesn't say anything about that. They're not criticizing her conversion or her marrying this terrible person, but they're criticizing the fact that she stomped on the altar and that she called God wolf, wolf. Like, isn't this misplaced criticism? So what the Rebbe says is, despite everything that she did, the sages are making an issue of the fact that she disrespectfully struck the altar with her sandal. What are they saying? They're saying, how is it possible that someone who has a Jewish soul, despite everything, all of her rejections, despite rejecting her faith and how she married, how is it possible that she can kick the altar? What are they saying? They're not saying that what she did was bad. They're saying that how is it possible that someone who turned her back on her faith still cares enough about the Jewish people that she's coming into the temple and she's screaming at God and saying, God, how could you do this to Jewish people? She wasn't desecrating the altar. She wasn't bringing pigs as sacrifices. She wasn't trying to break it. She was literally screaming at God and saying, God, how could you allow this to happen? Now, she was married to the person who was part of the people, who was part of the enemy who were making this happen. And yet it so boggled her mind. Her Jewishness came out at that point, and she was so worked up that she called God wolf, wolf, because she couldn't understand how it's possible. How is it possible for a God to do this? And this demonstrates the greatness of the soul. No matter what our external spiritual state is, no matter the depraved depths to which we sink, our soul remains faithful to God even at the moment of its failing. At our core, our soul is always the same. And even Miriam Bas Bilga, who turned her back on her people and behaved in the most corrupt way as a Jewish woman, everything that a Jewish woman shouldn't do, she did. And yet, when the breaking point came, she couldn't handle it anymore. She couldn't handle to see the suffering of her brothers and sisters. And only the Rebbe would have been able to look at a story like this that seems to shine such a negative light on this Jewish woman. And the Rebbe was able to see the positive. That just like Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev was able to see the positive in someone smoking on Shabbos, or that the Sanhedrin had to acquit someone if they all agreed that he was guilty because no one could find the positive. So too the Rebbe saw that Miriam, this woman who turned her back on her people, was so desperately upset, and the part of her Jewish soul just couldn't stay hidden, and she was crying to God and complaining, why are you doing this to the Jewish people? And the Rebbe delivered this talk in 1974. And until then, no one had made this positive point. But the point is clear that ultimately a Jew is never severed from his Judaism, even when he seems to be. And if we look at a Jew from the proper perspective, we're always going to be able to see the Jewish core. And therefore, there's no such thing as a distant Jew. The Rebbe, George Rohr, who's a big philanthropist, he created a beginner service at a synagogue in New York City. And he came to the Rebbe after Rosh Hashanah, and he was so proud. And he said, Rebbe, You'll be pleased to know that we had 180 people from Rosh Hashanah, for Rosh Hashanah services. They're Jews with no background. And the Rebbe's face became serious, and he says, what? And he became very serious, and Mr. Rohr said, what? Like, he thought he did this great thing. And the Rebbe said, every Jew has a background. Go tell them that they do not have a background. Their background is the same as every other Jew. They're children of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and they have the same background as every Jew. Because the Rebbe didn't see a Jew as a Jew that didn't have a background. He didn't see the concept of a distant Jew. He didn't understand the concept of a peripheral Jew, of a marginal Jew, of a secular Jew. The Rebbe did not believe in defining a Jew by his external disadvantages. He believed that a Jew should be defined by who they really are. Who they really are. They're a person with a soul. And it says in the Torah, Afal pi shachata Yisrael, who even a person who has sinned, even serious, grievous sins, is still a Jew. It's not a big problem because his essence is still there. You have a big stone in the garden that's blocking the way. You can't see all the beautiful flowers. Remove the stone, you'll see the beautiful flowers. And that's a Jew, and that's a Jew who sins. And the Rebbe hated the word far. When you say Jews far from Judaism, or you're being kira v'chokim, bring Jews who are far, the Rebbe did not consider any Jew as far. And many years before people started using the word special needs to speak about children with disabilities, or when people were still using the word retarded, the Rebbe in the 1960s used the word special needs. And he would say, many insist on calling a person retarded or different, but I call them special because they have their special gifts and their contributions to the world. And just because it's different than other people doesn't mean it's not just as special. So when he said this about the soldiers who were wounded, the Israeli soldiers, that they're not wounded soldiers, they're the mitsuyanim, they're the special soldiers. So the Rebbe always saw, whenever he saw something, whenever he saw a person, he always saw the positive. And if someone would say this Jew has no connection to Judaism, he wasn't defending Jews. The Rebbe, he didn't even see the world that way. He said a person, if a child fails in school, instead of calling him a failure, you look at the child and you figure out what's going on. Why aren't they doing well in school? Do they have a learning disability? Is there some issue going on? You help the child succeed instead of calling them a failure. You can't overlook faults. If the child's failing in school, help him. But that doesn't define who the person is. We're not defined by our shortcomings. We're defined by our abilities, and we're defined by our soul. And once we're defined by our soul, we're able to bring the best out of ourselves through our abilities, and we're able to bring out the best in others as well. Someone wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and he said he was doing different encounters with different communities, and he said, through these encounters, we hope to strengthen Judaism and bring back our lost youth and prevent further drifting of our youth. And the Rebbe took an X and he crossed out the word lost, and he said, and he wrote on the side, he put a question mark, and he said, confused. Like, you don't mean to write lost, confuse you. No Jew is lost. They might be confused, but they're not lost. So these ideas that the Rebbe constantly spoke about, and he drilled into our minds, are really ideals, and not just something, the Rebbe's way of looking at the world, but it has to be the way of our looking at the world. That we don't look at others as lost or others as far. We look at others as the essence of their soul, and that's because we look at ourselves as our essence of our soul, and that we have that same ability, and we have that same closeness, and that same connection as others do as well. And if we look at ourselves like that, we're able to look at others as well, like that. So we spoke earlier about how God wanted to create this world. He wanted to create a physical world so that we could take this physical world and make it spiritual. And the Rebbe would often speak about the passage written by the Rambam, that the soul desires to do mitzvahs. And we desire to do mitzvahs in order to make this world a better place. And so to speak, God desires our desires to do mitzvahs to make this world a better place. And not just for Jews, but there's also the 7 Noahide laws. And the Rebbe put a lot of effort into spreading these 7 Noahide laws, because this world is not just a place that has to be made better or purified by Jews, but it has to be made better by all human beings and all humankind. The CNN reporters came to the Rebbe in the 1992, right before he got sick, and they said, Rebbe, what's your message to the world? And the Rebbe said, add in acts of goodness and kindness to bring Mashiach. So that wasn't just the Rebbe's message to the Jews, that was a message to the whole world. You add in acts of goodness and kindness. You bring goodness to others, and you bring goodness, and then you bring goodness to yourself. And vice versa. You bring goodness and love to yourself, and then you're able to bring that love and goodness to others as well. The Rebbe was very close to Zalman Shazar, who later became the third president of Israel. And the Rebbe wrote him a letter. Zalman Shazar had written the Rebbe a letter, and he had given the Rebbe a gift. And the gift was a little booklet that was called 100 brachas. The person's supposed to say 100 blessings every day. And Zalman Shazar had given the Rebbe this little booklet. And the Rebbe wrote him a letter and said, thank you for the gift of the 100 blessing book. And he said, this is a prayer book that was written for converso Jews. So this specific book was written for converso Jews. Who are converso Jews? They're Marranos who lived in Spain in 1492. When they were expelled from Spain, many Jews left, but since many Jews were very wealthy and they didn't want to leave their abundance, they stayed in Spain and they practiced Judaism in hiding. And they were called conversos because in public they had converted, but in their house and in hiding they acted like Jews. So this booklet that Zalman Shazar had given the Rebbe had been printed for converso Jews, and eventually they emigrated to other countries when it became unbearable in Spain, and they were able to behave openly as Jews. And the Rebbe said, every so often when I look at this booklet, I can't help but think that truthfully we are all conversos to a degree, even to a greater degree, so to speak, as we act in many ways upon direct or indirect societal pressures. So he's saying, just like the conversos in public, they were acting a certain way, but in private, they're acting as Jews. We're the same. We're conversos. Sometimes we give into society's pressures. Sometimes we do things we shouldn't. Sometimes we're not acting as befits our soul. But the Rebbe said we're all conversos. At the very least, we have this internal coercion, and we act in ways that are inconsistent to our true will. He says, for in truth, we want to be part of the Jewish nation, fulfill God's commandments, and distance ourselves from wrongdoing. So the Rebbe looked at a person, he understood we make mistakes, we mess up. There's society pressure. We like physical things. We have desires. But at the end of the day, just because in public or, the conversos in public acted one way, it doesn't take away from them privately being Jews. And just because there are many times that we act out in our physical desires and we act out in our needs and our wants, doesn't take away from the fact that in our essence we're a Jew and that we try as hard as we can to be as good as we can, to do our best to make this world a dwelling place for God. And there's letters from the Rebbe where he writes to people. Someone will write him a letter and say, I don't believe in God, or I'm upset at God. And the Rebbe would write, you write that you don't believe, but I don't expect that, because I don't accept that you don't believe, because in truth, internally, I know that you're actually a believer. So, and an example given is if you see someone lying in the gutter and you want to help him, but he says, no, I'm fine. Deep down, he knows he doesn't belong in the gutter. His humanness is indestructible. But he's just saying that because at that moment he feels like laying in the gutter. So to us, sometimes we're in the gutter. But our essence, our humanity is always shining and is always a part of God and is always where it's supposed to be. And we can always come back to our essence, to who we really are. So at our core, we want to desire to do mitzvahs. And there's never a war between us and God. People often look at man and religion and they say, there's a war between man and God. I want this. Well, God wants me to do that. But this struggle is constant and it's part of life. And it's not a war. It's just the cycle. It's just our experience, our human experience. The word for tshuva, we speak about tshuva, and it's translated as repentance. But the real word is not repentance, because teshuva is tashav hay. Tashav means returning the hay, returning to who we are. Because even if someone messes up, they can always return. We're not repenting. We're returning to who we are, returning to our essence. So you have that diamond, and it got covered up with a little bit of dirt. Wipe off that dirt, and it'll return to what it was. A famous story about a king whose son, the prince, left the palace and got involved in all kinds of craziness. And he felt so disgusting. And he said, should I go back? How can I go back to the palace when I feel like I'm on such a low level? But at the end of the day, he realized that his father told him that his home is always open. He could always return. So he returns to the palace and he becomes a prince again. So too, we're always able to return. We're always able to return to who we are, to who our essence is, and reveal our source. And when we say return to our source, the word source implies a faraway entity that we have to, go travel very far to reach our source. But the truth is that we have that divine soul. We don't have to go great distances to arrive at our source. It's within us. All we have to do is, someone once asked, where's God? God is not in the sky, or God is not, in the synagogue only. God is within each and every one of us. And there is never hypocrisy in doing good. When you do one mitzvah, that one mitzvah is important in and of itself. And that's another revolution of the Rebbe. When in the 60s, when the Rebbe wanted the yeshiva bachrim to go in Manhattan and put tefillin on people, the religious world was in an uproar. How is it possible that you're going to take the tefillin and put it on a Jew who maybe didn't eat kosher that day or didn't wash his hands negelvasser? This seems to be hypocrisy. And the Rebbe's always said every single mitzvah is important. It doesn't matter what you did before and what you did after. What you're doing now is important. So if you're lighting Shabbat candles and then going out to a club, or if you're putting on tefillin and then doing something else that you're not supposed to, doesn't matter. That mitzvah is important, not just for yourself, but it's essential to reveal the goodness of the world as well. And the Rebbe constantly talked to people about this and tried to really emphasize the importance of this. And he said the nature of a Jew is that he always desires to act in accordance with the mitzvahs. Sometimes circumstances overshadow this desire or immobilize it. But once this external constraint is removed, the true innate will can reassert itself. So he said, according to the above, it should be clear there can be no question of hypocrisy when a Jew learns Torah and conducts his life according to Torah mitzvahs. Even if some of his other actions, even feelings, do not harmonize with Torah study and observance, the incongruity lies not in acting according to the Torah and mitzvahs, rather it lies in acting contrary to Torah mitzvahs. So your essence is, your truth is Torah mitzvahs. So the hypocrisy might someone sometimes do, what's not according to Torah mitzvahs, maybe, but this doesn't make him a hypocrite. It just means that our desires and our needs and our wants and whatever's going on in our life sometimes overshadow what the essence is, but the essence is always there. And the Rebbe said that the 10 tefillin campaign was, the 10 mitzvah campaign was tefillin, which was a campaign that the Rebbe, during the 6-Day War, since tefillin kind of connected to tanks, the tefillin kind of looked like tanks, so he said it's going to be a merit for the soldiers if everyone puts on tefillin, and there are even Chabad men who went out and helped put tefillin on the soldiers. There's Torah study, mezuzah, tzedakah, charity every single day. And then later the Rebbe said, specifically, even in our kitchen, in our cars, because charity is safe from harm and saves from death. Charity is very important. A home filled with holy books, Shabbat and holy candles, and holiday candles, which was during the Yom Kippur War. The word candles, Shabbat candles, is the Hebrew acronym is Neshek. Nero Shabbos Kodesh, and actually the Hebrew word for weapons is Neshek as well. So the Rebbe said that the Neshek, Nero Shabbos Kodesh, the candle light, the women and girls lighting candles, is going to be also a merit against the weapons that are being fought during this war. And then there's kosher and family purity. Those are the Rebbe's 10 mitzvah campaigns, and there were some others like learning the mitzvahs, but those were the essential campaigns that the Rebbe spoke about. And he said, even then you can have one, putting a mezuzah in your house, and even if you only do tefillin once a week, or even if you only study Torah 10 minutes a day, as long as you're doing a little bit. And nowadays, that was before the internet, now it's even easier to study as much as we want whenever we want. There's a Chinese proverb that says, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And the Rebbe didn't look at the journey as starting with a single step. The Rebbe looked as each step has value within itself, that each act and everything we do is important. So yes, the journey is important, and we're constantly, it's like we're on a ladder. And in a ladder, if you're not going up on a ladder, you can't stay stagnant, you're going down. So we're constantly climbing in life. But on the other hand, every single step has value in its own. And the Rebbe would write, people wonder about the value of a single good deed. Yet this wonderment seems illogical. Because if someone does a mitzvah, it gives Hashem so much pleasure and brings light to the world. So it's irrelevant what happens before or after, what's going on around them. This is the value of every mitzvah. it brings light to God, and it brings light to the world. And that mitzvah, in essence, is important in it of itself. The Rebbe would say in his first Hasidic Maimer when he became Rebbe in 1951, part of this discourse, he says, every Jew must ask, when will my actions be on par with those of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? So we're going to go back. We spoke about the Rebbe's love for every person, how the Rebbe saw every person as a soul, how the Rebbe appreciated the essence of the Jew, and there's nothing that could take away from that. It doesn't matter if there's difference of opinion or what a person did in their life. The Rebbe appreciated the diamond that existed within every single person. And the famous story is that a woman came to the Rebbe for dollars, and this was in the early 90s, when the Rebbe was in his 90s, and she says, Rebbe, how can you stand so long giving out dollars to people? You're old, like you should relax. And the Rebbe said, when you count diamonds, you don't get tired, because the Rebbe actually looked at every single person as a diamond. And it is incumbent upon us, especially in a time when there's challenges, and there's difficulty, and there's sadness, and there's death in the world. One of the big answers to difficulty and tragedy is to reconnect to other human beings. And obviously we can't physically reconnect, but to reach out to others with love and Ahavas Yisrael. Many of the disasters throughout history, our rabbis had said, were because of lack of love of each other. So it's incumbent upon us. It says that Mashiach will come, the third temple will be rebuilt because of love towards each other, and because of unconditional love towards each other, despite or in spite of anything that another person has done. We have to still love and appreciate that person. So this is a great time for us to be able to reach out to each other. Now it's either calling people who are elderly or who can't leave home, shopping for them, reaching out to our nurses and our doctors, or just there's many people who aren't elderly, who aren't doctors, but who need a helping hand, or who just need to hear who need a phone call, or who need to hear hello, how are you? There are people living alone. There are people who are struggling. There are people who have other issues that's making this even more difficult for them than maybe you or me. So we learned about, and we can appreciate and connect to the Rebbe's love for every Jew. And we also have to understand that the Rebbe always, despite his love and appreciation for every person, he pushed us to just constantly do more. The Rebbe told, there was a woman who had 9 children, and the Rebbe told her, he asked her to do a specific campaign to work on. And the Rebbe told her, you should put 25 hours of your day into this job. What does this mean? The Rebbe was realistic. He knew she had 9 children, but he was basically saying, any extra time you have, put into this project. And the Rebbe would often quote, there were the 12 Torah passages that the Rebbe constantly wanted children to say, because it brought great merit to the world as well. And he chose, they're from the Chumash, they're from the Torah, they're from the Talmud, and they're from the Tanya. And one of the verses says, if someone tells you, I have toiled, but I have not succeeded, do not believe it. If someone says, I have not toiled, yet I have succeeded, do not believe it. If someone says, I have toiled and succeeded, believe it. So despite our optimism and our love and our trust in ourselves, and our optimism and our love towards another person, that doesn't just mean we can lay back and just let the world go by us. It means that we still have to put as much effort and strength and energy into making ourselves and making the world around us a better place. And we all were created differently, and we all were created uniquely, and we each have our specific abilities, and we have our talents, and we have our gifts that we're able to contribute to the world, to make the world a better place. And every single day, it says that every single day a person has to say that the world was created for me. First of all, yes, that gives us confidence that the world was created for me. I'm important. But also, I have my mark that I have to make on the world today. Because when the verse says that we have to, every single day, a person has to say, when will my actions be on par with those of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Is it pretentious of a person to try to reach the deeds of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? How is this practical? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were the forefathers of the Jewish people. But we each have divine souls. We have the same divine soul that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had. And the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that our second soul is a piece of God. And because we have that same piece of God as the righteous people have, as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have, we have the ability to change the world, to have an effect of the world, just like they did. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did. And there's a famous story about a Hasidic Rebbe who says that when he dies, they're not going to ask him, "Why weren't you Moses?" They're going to ask you, "Why weren't you Zusha?" So we don't have to be like anyone else. Yet we still have our mark to make on the world. And a rabbi wrote to the Rebbe, and he wrote about a certain activity that he was doing and his goals for the activity. And the Rebbe basically responded, and he says, "You have this and this goal, but I think that you could accomplish even more." And another time, someone wrote to the Rebbe, Yitzchak Kaft in 1974. He was the Rebbe's emissary to New Haven, Connecticut, and he told the Rebbe that it's hard. He ran a day school at the time. And his family still runs the same school. And he said, it's very, very hard. And he said, I don't know what to do. And the Rebbe told him, he says, "Rebbe, can you help me?" And the Rebbe said, "I already did everything necessary by sending you. You have the goods and the abilities and the talents, so cash in on it. Get to know yourself. You need to get to truly know yourself, not the way you think you know yourself. That knowledge is tainted by what people have told you can do and you cannot do, and based on your previous experiences. But all that is just external to you. Know who you really are in essence, and please don't undersell yourself. And when you do that, you're going to be surprised at how much you can accomplish." The Rebbe once sent a shliach. He sent Rabbi Kotlarsky to a little island called Curacao. He said, go and find. He sent him to, I don't remember exactly, but I think he sent him to bring matzah there, but not 100%. But he sent him to bring something there. So afterwards, this man, Rabbi Grossman, from Curacao, he writes the Rebbe a letter, and he basically says, "Thank you for reaching out to me, however many years ago." And he says, "Thank you for thinking about a small Jew in Curacao." And the Rebbe writes back the letter, and he says, "I appreciated your regards, but I must take exception to you referring to yourself as a small Jew from Curacao. There's surely no need to emphasize to you at length that every Jew, man or woman, has a nefesh elokis, a part of God. Thus, there is no such thing as a small Jew. There's no such thing as a small Jew, and a Jew must never underestimate his or her tremendous potential." So the Rebbe was appreciating and loving and just really accepting who he is and saying, you're not a small Jew, but also that because you're not a small Jew, because every single Jew is great and has this essential soul, you have this tremendous potential. And then he gave him a blessing, which was actually for the holiday of Passover. So the Rebbe was able to do both. He was able to love and accept, but still bring out the importance emphasize the importance that we have to realize how much potential we have, that we have our issues, but at the same time, we have that soul. And because we have that soul, we have the essential quality to change the world. So this brings us back to the beginning of the lesson. And there's this doctor, psychiatrist, who said, he wrote about the Rebbe's philosophy of education. And he says that one of the Rebbe's philosophies is that the teachers must know that both teacher and student have infinite potential. The teacher has infinite potential to teach, and the student has infinite potential to learn and grow from his teachings. So this brings us back to the beginning of the lesson. And we saw how the Rebbe constantly pleaded, asked, encouraged people to engage in additional activities, to do more mitzvos, more accomplishments, to never stop, to never be satisfied. And yet, the Rebbe was still able to love every Jew, to appreciate every Jew, and to accept every Jew, and still be passionate about the need of every Jew to accept as much of Torah and mitzvahs at the same time. So he's able to do those all together. Love every Jew, encourage every Jew to be as connected to Judaism as possible, and plead that every person should work as hard as possible to reach their potential. And this is because the Rebbe saw the soul and expression of ourselves. And he wanted us to realize that when we think about ourselves, we fail to take into account who we are. And the Rebbe knew who we are, and he refused to look at any person from any other perspective than looking at the divinity within each human being, and looking at each person and seeing them as holy and perfect. And when we're able to look at our essence and see ourselves as a holy and perfect, we can have unconditional love of ourselves and love of others. And any of our mistakes and issues are not an external part of ourselves and not an internal part of ourselves. The Rebbe wanted us to live from this place of perfection, and he wanted us to live from who we really are. And the Rebbe saw within us when we're able to understand and express our essence, we are able to realize that we have this great storage of desire to really use everything we have to make the world a better place and to make ourselves better. And the Rebbe didn't want us to rest, because the Rebbe understood that we have an animal soul which has desires and needs that sometimes make us mess up. But he also realized that the animal soul has natural laziness and small-mindedness. So when the Rebbe encouraged us to accomplish as much as possible, he knew that there's this animal soul trying to make us lazy, but he knew that the reservoirs of strength and ability that we have within us, and he wanted us to bring our full potential. And he knew by working hard to bring us to our full potential, not only would we be satisfied, but that would make us even happier with ourselves. And he would tell us repeatedly, your accomplishments do not capture the true you. If you knew who you were, you would do much more. Failure to do more means judging yourself externally and overlooking your essential self. Now, obviously, the Rebbe wasn't saying we shouldn't take care of ourselves. He was just saying that we should realize how much we have to offer to the world. I mean, the Rebbe himself never took a day's vacation. He only ever went to visit the camps in upstate New York 2 times. The Rebbe's mother actually once had encouraged him a few times to take a vacation, because the Rebbe's in Europe, and even now the Rebbe, different Rebbes go on vacation to California or to Miami. The Rebbe said, I go to the field 2 times a month, and he was actually referring to visiting his father-in-law's grave. The Rebbe would visit the previous Rebbe's grave twice a month. And then later on, he would do it a few times a week. But the Rebbe constantly pushed himself, and he pushed others as well. And he said once someone went to Yechidus, a private audience with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked him to do something. And this person was kind of hesitant. I guess it was like a big responsibility. And the Rebbe said, however much I demand of you, I demand of myself tenfold. So it wasn't just the Rebbe telling others what to do. He had these demands on himself as well. And there was a Rabbi Safran in London. At the age of 42, he had a private audience with the Rebbe, and he said, Rebbe, I feel burned out. And the Rebbe told him, I just turned 70, and I took upon myself 71 new projects. You just turned 42. Why don't you take upon yourself 43 new projects? So the loving acceptance and persistent demanding stem from the same place. They might seem like opposites. If you love someone, why do you put demands on them? But it really comes from the same place. Recognizing the divinity within each and every one, and realizing that's at the core of one's being, and that it finds expression in the person's being all the time. And how does it find expression? It finds expression by realizing who we are and who we are at essence. People don't resent being pushed to do more if it grows out of recognition of who they really are and how they can be truer to themselves. So when we realize who we are, we realize how much we can accomplish. And when we accomplish, it makes us feel better about ourselves. Someone who lies around in bed and isn't doing anything the whole day, it doesn't make them feel good that they're resting. It makes them feel like they aren't doing anything, and then they become hard on themselves. The more we do and the more we accomplish, makes us realize who we are in our essence and how much we have to contribute to the world. And the persistent demanding that the Rebbe did was just revelation or reflection of who the Rebbe knew that we were. And he wanted us, when the Rebbe would tell us to take another step to do more, he wanted us to live from the place within us that's flawless. He was reminding us of our inherent worth. And the more we are able to see ourselves in this light, the more meaningful and productive our life would be. So to end, I'll just do a review, but we're living in a time that's complicated, and we're in our homes, so it's kind of hard to accomplish a lot. And it's not necessarily a time that people should make demands upon themselves to write a book or, I don't know, create an invention, because it's hard enough to just get through day by day. But on the other hand, it's a good time to take upon ourselves some kind of activity, something that we've been wanting to do, especially if you have free time, something that you've been wanting to do for a long time, and something that can make you feel good and can change the lives of others as well. So just to wrap up some key points is that our truest self is our godly soul, that our spiritual experience is a moment of unrestricted contact with our deepest essence, and that our physical life and our physical activities are actually vehicles and expression of our soul, and that our longing for materialism and blessing is also just an expression of our desire to have the resources to implement the divine plan to take the physical world and make it into a spiritual place for God. And goodness is not secondary to our core identity. It's who we are, and even if there's negativity, it's just temporary, just a side external part of who we are. And when we have faults and failures and bad habits, they're not a definition of who we are. They're just also an external part of who we are. When we tap into our inherent value and our perfection, we can love ourselves, and then we can love others. And because our essence is an indistinguishable spark of God, like the Alter Rebbe said, mamish, it's an actual part of God. It doesn't matter how we behave, our Jewishness can never be extinguished, like we see from the story of Miriam. And our soul desires whatever God desires, which is the deepest and truest desire of God, is to do mitzvah, is for us to do mitzvahs. And so too it is our deepest and truest desires. Tshuva means returning. We're returning to ourselves. We're harmonizing our lives with our innermost essence, which is our godly consciousness. And then going back to what we were saying in the beginning, that there can be no question of hypocrisy when we choose to do a mitzvah, because a mitzvah is an essential part of us, and it doesn't matter what we do before and after. Every mitzvah is a step in the right direction. And doing the mitzvahs just brings more positivity and light into ourselves and into the world. And we have to remember that our divine souls are infinite, and we're empowered to accomplish far beyond our perceived abilities. So with that in mind, Pesach is coming in exactly a week. In a week from last night was the first Seder. And Seder is also a time of going out of slavery, of going out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the word Mitzrayim, which means boundaries and limitations. We have to leave those limitations. We have to look truly to who we are. We have to understand and realize and appreciate our essence and our soul. We have to leave those things that are restricting us. Anything, bad habits, bad relationships, any negativity in our life, we have to try to get rid of that so that we're able to cleanse ourselves, so to speak, and leave Egypt. And on a practical note, with Pesach coming, it's a perfect opportunity, like I was saying before, to reach out to people who need the extra love around Pesach time. You know, Pesach is a holiday. It's probably the most popular Jewish holiday because it's family time. And we need to take this time that we have, and even though we're not physically with other people, we need to find ways, each in our own ways, to really try to make a difference in other people's lives, because there's people suffering physically, but there's people suffering emotionally and mentally as well. So, you know, I'm sure if we look around, there's amazing organizations, and we see the power of the human spirit now when people are going out of their way to, again, shop for people who need shopping, helping the poor, helping the needy, helping children who are at home without parents who are working, reaching out to lonely people, homeless, whatever it is. The power of humanity is really evident now, and we have to each do our part to really try to change the world around us in whatever tiny way we can now. So with that, the blessing for Pesach is a kosher, Chag Pesach kosher v'sameach. We say about Pesach, it should be kosher, because we know how many rules and how hard it is to be, really be perfect on Pesach, but it should be kosher. And kosher, we say, even the English dictionary says kosher, everything's kosher, everything should be good. And sameach, we say specifically, we know there's other holidays that are more primarily known for their happiness, but Pesach is also known as that time of happiness. So it should be sameach, it should be a happy holiday. That Pesach should be the holiday that doesn't only take us personally out of our personal exiles, but takes the world out of the exiles and the sadness and the suffering that it is now. And it says about the month of Nisan, the month that we're in now, that it's the month of redemption. It's the month of miracles, and this should be the month that sees miracles beyond miracles in the world, and brings healing to all those who need healing in whatever way, physically, mentally, emotionally. So Chag Pesach Kasher V'Sameach, and it was great studying with all of you today.